1943. Over the frozen skies in Europe, silver B-17s fly in tight formation, their wings shuddering under the pounding of German flak. The air is filled with black bursts, tracer fire, and the distant wail of Messerschmitts diving in. Inside each bomber, young men grip their controls, praying the next minute won't be their last. They're 20,000 feet over occupied Europe, outnumbered, outgunned, and alone. Then, from the sun above, salvation roars in. Massive, thundering, and armed to the teeth. The P-47 Thunderbolt drops from the clouds like an avenging angel. 8 50 caliber machine guns ignite, cutting through enemy fighters in a storm of fire. The Luftwaffe breaks formation. Bombers live to fight another day. The Germans called it Jabo, the fighter bomber that struck like thunder and climbed like a storm. To American pilots, it was simply the Jug, and by war's end, this 7-ton monster would fly more than 500,000 combat sorties, destroy over 7,000 enemy aircraft, knock out 6,000 tanks, and shatter 68,000 trucks and trains across Europe and the Pacific. It wasn't pretty like the Spitfire, nor graceful like the Mustang, but it was the most rugged, the most trusted, and the most feared. Forged in the factories of Republic Aviation on Long Island, powered by a 2,300 horsepower Pratt & Whitney engine, it could dive faster than any plane in the sky and climb back home, riddled with bullets yet still alive. This is the story of the fighter who turned desperation into dominance, who carried America's hope through flak and fire. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, the famed Jug. In the summer of 1940, as the Battle of Britain raged across the English Channel, American observers were learning a painful truth. The United States had no fighter that could match the speed or altitude of the German Messerschmitt Bf-109. The Army Air Corps had placed its faith in bombers, believing formations of flying fortresses could protect themselves. That illusion wouldn't survive long. When the first American heavy bombers entered the skies over occupied Europe in late 1942, the Luftwaffe tore through them with brutal efficiency. Escorting Spitfires could protect them over France, but their short range forced them to turn back long before the bombers reached their targets. The 8th Air Force was bleeding men and machines. America needed something powerful, a fighter that could fly far, climb high, and hit hard. At Republic Aviation on Long Island, one man began sketching an answer on the back of an envelope. Alexander Sasha Kartveli, a Russian-born engineer who understood that brute strength could be just as vital as speed. His vision was radical. A single-seat fighter with a huge Pratt & Whitney R-2800 double Wasp radial engine at its heart, weighing nearly 7 tons, armed with 8 50 caliber Browning machine guns, and capable of carrying bombs or rockets beneath its wings. It was an aircraft designed not to dance but to dominate. When the prototype XP-47B took to the skies on May 6, 1941, it stunned test pilots. At full power, the Thunderbolt could reach speeds of 428 miles per hour, climb to 42,000 feet, and dive faster than any piston engine fighter in existence. It was the biggest, heaviest, and most overbuilt single-engine fighter ever attempted a flying tank with wings. To the men who first saw it, the Thunderbolt looked absurd, enormous, blunt-nosed, and far from elegant. But Alexander Kartveli wasn't building a beauty queen. He was building a survivor. He famously said, "If it looks right, it is right, but if it saves a pilot's life, it's beautiful." When war production began, the Republic's factories in Farmingdale, New York, Evansville, Indiana, and Buffalo thundered with activity. By early 1942, the first models rolled off the line, the P-47B, soon nicknamed the Razorback for its high, ridge-like spine behind the cockpit. The United States had finally built a fighter worthy of the skies it was about to enter, a machine born not from theory, but necessity. Its mission was clear: protect the bombers, fight the Luftwaffe, and turn the tide of the air war over Europe. The stage was set. The Jug was ready. and its pilots were about to find out what flying 7 tons of American steel really meant. When the first P-47 Thunderbolts arrived in England in early 1943, they didn't exactly inspire confidence. To the pilots of the 4th and 56th Fighter Groups, many of whom had cut their teeth flying nimble RAF Spitfires, the Jug looked like a flying oil drum. It was enormous, 3 times heavier than a Spitfire, sluggish on the climb, and drank fuel like a battleship. Even its takeoff required a long, roaring sprint down the runway, its nose blocking forward view until the tail lifted clear. British pilots took one look and smirked. "You'll never make it home in that milk jug," one of them quipped. The name stuck and Jug became a badge of pride. But first impressions can be deceiving. On April 15, 1943, over the skies of Belgium, Captain Don Blakesley of the 4th Fighter Group met a Luftwaffe FW-190 head-on. The German tried to dive away, but the Jug followed, screaming down at nearly 500 miles per hour. No other fighter in Europe could dive that fast and still pull out alive. The FW-190 disintegrated in the suburbs of Ostend. When Blakesley landed, his ground crew told him, "Sir, you were doing over 600. He just grinned and said, "She damn well ought to dive, she sure can't climb." Within months, the skepticism vanished. Pilots learned that what the Jug lacked in grace, it made up for in brute power and toughness. It could take hits that would rip any other fighter apart and still bring its pilot home. Colonel Francis Gaby Gabreski, one of America's top aces, recalled a comrade who took 5 direct 20mm cannon hits in his right wing and still landed safely. Another, Blakesley himself, once returned to base with 68 shell holes in his aircraft. The Jug was fast in a dive, deadly in a burst, and virtually indestructible. Its 850 caliber guns could tear a bomber apart in seconds. Luftwaffe pilots quickly learned to fear the silver-bellied fighters that roared in from the sun. By late 1943, the Thunderbolt was escorting B-17 flying fortresses deep into occupied Europe, to Antwerp, Lille, and eventually to the heart of Germany. Its range was still limited, but wherever it could fly, the bombers stood a fighting chance. One Luftwaffe ace, General Adolf Galland, flew a captured P-47 and later admitted, "It is not a plane, it is a fortress in itself." The Jug had proven its worth. It was no longer the clumsy brute pilots had mocked in England, it was now the hammer of the US 8th Air Force. And as 1944 dawned, that hammer was about to fall hard on the German war machine itself. By mid-1944, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt had evolved from an escort fighter into one of the most feared ground attack weapons of the entire war. It was no longer just protecting bombers, it was destroying the German war machine piece by piece. When Allied forces landed in Normandy on June 6, 1944, the skies above the beaches roared with thunderbolts. They screamed over Omaha and Utah, their engines echoing like rolling thunder, their wings heavy with bombs and rockets. Below, German columns tried to regroup, but the Jugs were relentless. They dove through flak, raked convoys with 850 caliber guns, and unleashed 500-pound bombs and high-velocity rockets that tore tanks open like tin cans. In the weeks after D-Day, the 9th Air Force, under General Hoyt S. Vandenberg, unleashed thousands of Thunderbolts in close support of Allied troops. They became the soldiers' guardian angels, answering calls from tank crews pinned under fire, striking bridges, trains, and armored convoys with surgical precision. Pilots called this the cab rank system, orbiting above the battlefield until a ground unit radioed for help. The results were staggering. In just a few months, Thunderbolts destroyed or damaged over 6,000 tanks and armored vehicles, 68,000 trucks, 9,000 locomotives, and 86,000 railway cars. One Army observer said watching a squadron of P-47s attack was like watching a thunderstorm made of fire. The Germans came to dread the low-flying Jugs. To them, the distinctive howl of the Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine meant death was seconds away. And while the Luftwaffe tried to fight back, it was already breaking. By the summer of 1944, Colonel Hubert Hub Zemke's 56th Wolfpack Fighter Group had become the most lethal unit in the 8th Air Force, claiming 665 enemy aircraft in the air and hundreds more on the ground. Even Luftwaffe ace Adolf Galland admitted, when a formation of Thunderbolts appeared over the front, it was like the coming of a storm. You could not escape it. From the hedgerows of Normandy to the bridges of the Rhine, the P-47 had turned from the underdog into the unstoppable. Its massive frame, once mocked for being too big, became its greatest strength, able to carry more firepower, take more damage, and deliver more destruction than any Allied fighter in the war. By the end of 1944, the Jug wasn't just winning battles, it was reshaping the entire air war. The Luftwaffe was bleeding out, German armor couldn't move by daylight, and the skies over Europe, once ruled by the Iron Cross, now thundered with the sound of American engines. The P-47 Thunderbolt had done what it was built to do: protect, punish, and prevail. While the P-47 was smashing German armor in Europe, another chapter of its legend was being written thousands of miles away across the steaming jungles and vast island chains of the Pacific. In New Guinea, Burma, and the Philippines, Thunderbolts arrived to replace older fighters that had struggled in the brutal tropical conditions. Their giant radial engines thrived in the heat, where liquid-cooled planes often failed. And when Japanese troops dug into caves or bunkers, the Jug's heavy payload turned those strongholds into smoke and rubble. In June 1944, during the fierce invasion of Saipan, P-47s of the 7th Air Force swept low over the beaches, blasting Japanese positions with napalm and rockets, paving the way for Marines pinned down in the sand. From that moment, the Thunderbolt became a staple of every Pacific landing, striking at Tinian, Guam, Iwo Jima, and later Okinawa. The aircraft's enormous range was pushed even further with the P-47N, a late-war variant designed for the long flights between island bases. With extended wings and bigger fuel tanks, it could escort B-29 superfortresses on raids stretching over 1,000 miles across open ocean all the way toward the Japanese homeland. To American infantrymen slogging through the jungles, the Jug's deep, throaty roar meant safety. When its 8 guns opened up, Japanese convoys vanished in fire and dust. Pilots in the Pacific called it the best friend a soldier ever had. The British, too, discovered its worth. RAF squadrons in India and Burma swapped their aging Hurricanes for P-47s, painting white stripes on their wings to avoid confusion with Japanese fighters. Armed with 500-pound bombs, rockets, and even napalm, they hammered Japanese supply lines through the dense jungles and along the winding Burma Railway. One pilot wrote in his log, "You could feel the earth shake when 8 Jugs came in together. The jungle simply stopped moving." By war's end, the Thunderbolt had flown on every major front from Europe's frozen skies to Asia's humid battlefields, and had proven unmatched in durability and firepower. It could dive faster, hit harder, and take more punishment than any other fighter ever built. It was not just a plane, it was a symbol of American strength, resilience, and the industrial might that turned the tide of World War II. When the guns finally fell silent in 1945, more than 15,500 P-47 Thunderbolts had rolled out of American factories, more than any other U.S. fighter in history. They had flown 545,000 combat sorties, destroyed over 7,000 enemy aircraft, and unleashed an estimated 60,000 tons of bombs. The Jug had written its name across 2 oceans in smoke and thunder. In Europe, it had helped cripple the Luftwaffe and break the back of Hitler's armored divisions. In the Pacific, it had burned through the jungles of Burma and crushed the defenses of Saipan, Guam, and Okinawa. Wherever the fight was hardest, the Jug was there, steady, fearless, indestructible. After the war, Thunderbolts continued to serve proudly in U.S. Air Force and Air National Guard units until the mid-1950s, even standing ready during the early years of the Cold War. Dozens of allied nations from Italy and Turkey to Brazil and Mexico flew them long after the last shot of World War II was fired. Some of those nations used the Jug well into the jet age, calling it the old lion that never quit. Hollywood immortalized it too. General Hap Arnold sent director William Wyler to the front lines to film Thunderbolt, a raw, color documentary showing the aircraft pounding Axis targets in Italy. When it premiered in 1945, audiences saw real combat footage for the first time. Streaks of tracer fire, bombs bursting among smoke-choked valleys, and that unmistakable roar of the R-2800 engine. America finally saw the war the Jug had been fighting. To the men who flew it, the Thunderbolt was more than steel and rivets, it was a friend that brought them home. Colonel Francis Gabby Gabreski said it best. She could take a pounding, and she could give it back tenfold. You could always trust the Jug. Even today, restored P-47s still thunder across airshow skies, their engines shaking the ground as they did over Normandy, the Ardennes, and the Pacific Islands. Each one is a living echo of the courage and determination that defined an era. The P-47 Thunderbolt was never the prettiest, never the fastest, but it was the toughest, most loyal companion a pilot could ever have. It fought for freedom, forged victory from the clouds, and left behind a legacy that still roars, 8 guns at a time, in the heart of aviation history.